Is a civil war brewing inside the Republican Party over the administration's handling of negotiations with Putin? Just how much are they willing to tolerate? And why did Steve Witkoff's Tucker Carlson interview spark this uprising from Republican mega donors? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to talk about that, plus more weird developments in the U.S. effort to conquer Greenland. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is part of a really interesting story because according to, this has been reported by Reuters, among other sources, that major GOP fundraisers, but this is really just an effort by one GOP fundraiser who sort of wrote this letter to the administration, but in fact, it was signed supposedly by dozens, maybe even hundreds of wealthy Republican donors. This is a man named Eric Levine, who has called for President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and to be fired, particularly regarding his comments about Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, the letter itself has not been released to the public, right? But it has been sent to the White House through trusted channels. What's most interesting, right, is that it's pretty brazen and pretty critical of Witkoff. Now, the overall theme is that the Witkoff was, quote, duped by both Hamas and Vladimir Putin during negotiations. And this is probably in part because Witkoff, after having met with Vladimir Putin, went on Tucker Carlson and repeated a bunch of absolute lies from Vladimir Putin, right? And it's hard to believe somebody is going to be a credible negotiator if they are unable to tell the difference between a true statement, a matter of dispute or opinion, and absolute falsehoods. So what exactly is he talking about? Well, again, this is absolutely a bloodbath. The email included the phrase, quote, that Steve Witkoff is an embarrassment to the country and the president he serves, which I think is actually probably pretty true after that Tucker Carlson interview. It says he should do the honorable thing and resign. Failing that, he should be summarily fired, right? Now, Levine is a board member of the Republican Jewish Coalition, but he emphasizes was speaking in his personal capacity. Now, here's the thing, right? Witkoff, to refresh you guys, went on Tucker Carlson and after having met with Putin. And bear in mind, Witkoff, unable to seemingly discern that he was being pawned off onto Putin's lackeys before meeting with him, right? Bear in mind, Putin is ostensibly negotiating to end a disastrous war, right? And so if someone was to say, hey, I'm going to send my personal handpicked envoy to your country to meet with you to discuss ending this disastrous war, you're going to clear your schedule. Can you think of anything else in Russia that could be happening that would warrant Vladimir Putin ignoring a U.S. envoy after 3 years of war? Remember, the United States and Russia up until this point had no meaningful contact beyond a few phone calls and deconfliction. And so Putin, of course, kept Witkoff waiting for hours. Witkoff is is used to being a real estate investor, where when he meets with heads of state or other, like the governor of Florida, for example, Witkoff probably got pawned off onto people because the governor of Florida actually meets with a lot of people more important than Steve Witkoff. But that's not true when you represent the largest economy and the largest military power on planet Earth. There is no one on this planet that is more important, unless Putin literally was like, my wife is dying in the hospital, or my kid got hit by a car. There is no excuse. So Witkoff was, of course, kept in a waiting room for 8 hours, pawned off onto lackeys, then finally met with Putin. Putin managed to bamboozle him, which apparently seems to be quite an easy thing to do, spun him around and spit him out, where he then went on an interview with Tucker Carlson, as negotiators in sensitive geopolitical conflicts are apt to do. Of course, drop a 3-hour podcast. Now, the thing is, Witkoff on that podcast repeated just talking point after talking point straight out of Russia's propaganda playbook. For example, and this is probably the most brazen, is that Witkoff maintained that the regions that Russia has annexed, conquered in Ukraine, actually want to be part of Russia. He says, quote, they held a referendum. Let's see if I can find it here. Right? Because they're Russia speaking. Witkoff said, quote, they are Russian speaking, and there have been referendums where the overwhelming majority of people have indicated they want to be under Russian rule. Now, worth noting is that the Russian referendums were, let's see, unbelievably fake, right? They were, one, done under military occupation. Here is a Wikipedia article for those of you that have forgotten about them. They are described by almost every institution as a sham, including countries, right, that have no dog in the fight, right? They were rejected by every single country except for North Korea, famous for actually its high integrity elections. But this was basically staged, and we know this. Let's see if we can find the conduct here. Only specific people able to vote, only able to vote in adjoining territories. Polling station opened for residents. Voters were coerced into voting with armed soldiers going door to door to collect votes. Guys, does that sound like, imagine if occupation soldiers in any region were to knock on your door, armed to the teeth, and say to you, we're collecting votes, so make sure you cast your ballot. We're going to decide if you like being occupied by us or if you don't. Guys, it's not hard to figure out how you need to vote. Ballots were actually filled out by the soldiers rather than the voters themselves. Voters were required to give their votes verbally to a soldier who wrote them on a sheet of paper. Again, imagine if you were in like occupied France in 1942 and two German soldiers knocked on your door and said, we're collecting votes for whether or not you like occupation, whether you appreciate the German administration. Could you tell us just verbally, real quick, if you like having German troops occupy your country? What exactly answer do you give? Of course, voters didn't need any form of ID to cast a vote. And remember, Russia just took over that region. So whatever administrative functions might have been performed were, right? The Ukrainian government, whatever voter rolls they had, were absolutely trashed, right? And so this is absolutely completely ridiculous. And of course, the results were exactly what you thought they would be. They were 97% of voters, conveniently, or voters, said they liked the occupation. They wanted to be annexed by Russia. And so that is what Steve Witkoff considers a fair and free election. Obviously, these people indicate they want to be ruled by Russia. And bear in mind, even Crimea was not subject. Crimea was even worse, right? The Crimean Peninsula citizens just woke up one day and saw a bunch of absolutely not Russian troops standing in every government building and in every public square. Now, we know they weren't Russian troops because despite wearing Russian uniforms, speaking Russian, having Russian military gear, having approached from Russian military bases, and they did not have any patches and they didn't have any identifications. Therefore, they were simply a mystery force that emerged organically, again, with Russian BMPs and Ratnik uniforms, and simply annexed Crimea. So Crimea, separate thing, but Steve Witkoff kind of rolls them all up together. Well, if they speak Russian, of course, you may know that by that metric, a huge number of counties in the state of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico should be simply annexed by Mexico, right? And it's only fair given that those counties are majority Spanish speaking. You also, of course, would have to see places like Quebec actually should be annexed by France, right? Because they're French speaking, right? It's not possible for a country to have more than one language spoken. That would be crazy. How could you have a country like that, right? Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. So Witkoff also managed to put his foot in his mouth over Hamas, right? He does not believe they are ideologically intractable, he said. He said the Palestinian militant group could demilitarize, and then he says maybe they could stay around, be involved politically. Worth noting that, again, you can dislike the Israeli conduct of the war in Gaza, but that's not the same thing as saying you love Hamas, guys. Hamas is definitely a terror group, and destroying the state of Israel is like baked into who they are. So again, this is a level of naivete that is absolutely eye-popping. Now, here's the funny thing, right? Is that Levine says, right? One, he points out that Tucker Carlson is kind of a Russian shill. He says for guests with whom he disagrees or for whom he senses weakness, Carlson browbeats and humiliates them until they agree with him or cannot even finish their point. Right? Levine added sarcastically, perhaps we should just be grateful that Witkoff did not congratulate Kim Jong-un on his last electoral landslide, given that, again, worth noting that around 90, I think it ended up being about 94% of the votes for annexation. You know, it was about 97% said they want to join Russia, right, in those annexed regions. Let's see if we can see what percentage. Oh, good. Let's see. The North Korean parliamentary election, for example, found that, let's see if we can get it here. One candidate per electoral system, conduct. Let's see if we can find it. There we go. 99% of voters turned out and 100% of them. So again, you're talking about just a small, oh, here we go. I go 92% of voters. Well, sorry, had voted by noon. So you're seeing that when you see this 99.99% of voters, this is like, right, these are what sham elections look like, right? Even you could literally in the United States, I mean, you could literally have single party candidates who, right, even if there's no one opposing someone, they still manage to only get like 90% because some people write in and some people just refuse to vote for a candidate they don't like, even if there's no alternative. So when you see elections at numbers above 90, unless they are like unbelievably popular viewpoints that are just symbolically being put up to vote, you can assume that there's some level of fraud there, right? And what I want to point out is that J.D. Vance is actually going to bat for Steve Witkoff. He says, quote, Steve Witkoff is a great guy doing an incredible job. The people sniping him are mad that he is succeeding where they have failed for 40 years. And then he adds, turns out a lot of diplomacy boils down to don't be an idiot. Here's what I want to point out is that, as discussed, if you were going to have your grandma go in to heart surgery, right? And we're going to say that fixing a heart is more complicated than running a country, and it's certainly more complicated than establishing a peace between two warring countries, right? I think it's fair. I think that's a fair analogy. Would you trust a cardiologist who said, listen, a lot of people are critical of me, but I think your grandmom's surgeon, I think he's a great guy. He's doing an incredible job. People are just mad because he's successful in their failures, all the other cardiologists. And he says, turns out a lot of heart surgery boils down to a simple skill. Don't be an idiot. And you go, no, it doesn't boil down to don't be an idiot. That's a requisite to like joining the diplomatic corps of your country at the start. There's a bunch of other skills involved in negotiation, and it's not just don't be an idiot, right? That's like saying you can just common sense your way through heart surgery. You can't. You can't. And if you wouldn't trust your mom in the hands of a surgeon who thought that, then you probably shouldn't trust your country in the hands of a negotiator who thought that. Just like we said, we wouldn't trust. Steve Witkoff has decades of experience in real estate. I would never get real estate investment advice from a career diplomat. I would never do it, right? But conversely, I would never let a real estate investor handle sensitive international diplomacy. So it is not crazy to say that, right? One of the things that happens when you spend so much time on social media is that you get brain rot, right? TikTok brain rot. Because what happens is, and this is what seems to have happened to the vice president and the president, is that when they watch Fox News, when they watch dog shit media, when they watch tweets, which are just 100 characters long, just 200 characters. That's all you get to make a point, is that you can't sit there and go, okay, here is all of the perspectives of someone who I disagree with, right? And here's all the things they think, but here's the ways in which I disagree with them, right? And this is right? That is a sophisticated point. People write entire books, 1,000+ word essays to describe that situation, to say, here's the flaws in this person's choices. Here's the things I think they're blind to, right? But on Twitter, you can only say, they're so dumb. I can't believe they X, right? As we've said, my criticism of the previous White House has been that they lacked the ability to choose a singular path and instead seemed to reach these consensus decisions. But in the process, they under-equipped the Ukrainians at every step, right? That is a criticism of them. But because I spend 45 minutes talking about these issues, I can lay those things out. But if I had to distill them down to a tweet or a TikTok, what would I have to say? Well, I'd have to say something like, the White House has no one in charge of it. And the administration's failing cannot take a path to victory for that reason. And you see how there's a huge difference. In one of them, when you distill it down to 100 words, you can't help but make your opponent sound like a complete fool, like a totally inept idiot, as though everyone around them is like a 6th grader, right? But in reality, at the top levels, right? It's like saying a CEO, right? Do you think there's really a CEO who's a total fucking buffoon? There's some, probably, like, the boss's kid who has like a coke or a ketamine problem. They might be real idiots, right? But the vast majority of CEOs look at the information and they try to make the smartest decisions possible, and sometimes they fail. But they usually fail for like kind of intelligent reasons. And so the fact that the administration cannot conceive of the idea that smart people came to a different conclusion for good reasons based on good analysis is sort of a danger, right? Because again, this is what you end up with. You end up with someone like Steve Witkoff, who thinks he's a genius because, again, he has been a negotiator for, let's see, it's April 11th. He's been a negotiator for approximately 100 days of his life. He's 60-something years old. And so the idea that he can come in to this new sport, that he can come into basketball at 61, having been a golfer his whole life, and win the fucking NBA championships. I mean, if you could, like, look how many experienced veteran European politicians cannot broker this deal. China wishes it could broker a deal. It tried to and failed. The idea that Steve Witkoff, the diplomatic version of your drunk cousin, is going to walk on to the Lakers and make the team and then become 3-time back-to-back champions and get the MVP, that's what we're describing Steve Witkoff is pulling off here, is fucking impossible. Do you notice that the other deal he negotiated, that Gaza ceasefire deal, remember, that fell apart. That lasted weeks, right? So, boy, it doesn't matter what JD Vance tweets. The proof is in the pudding. And the proof is that the Israeli military is still smashing people in Gaza. In fact, they're in some ways conducting larger, broader scale combat operations than they have at any other point of this conflict, right? Let's see if we can zoom out here, right? So you can see still tremendous military operations taking place across the Gaza Strip. Continued military operations in the West Bank. Oh, and look, there's also Israeli operations in Lebanon and in Syria. So instead of containing the conflict, Witkoff's peace deal actually managed to expand it. So again, I'm in agreement with Steve Levin here. You need to let actual professionals. And this is one of the things he said in his letter. He said, listen, Marco Rubio needs to take this over. Right? Do you notice that every time Marco Rubio, as this channel's pointed out, every time Marco Rubio has been involved, our allies say, wow, we are strong partners in accomplishing our shared goal. And every time Witkoff or Trump or even JD Vance has become involved, people have been like, we're furious. These people are idiots. These people are like absolute goobers and have no business. Right? Okay. And here's the thing. Here's what kills me is that the president seems to just be continually giving Russia just favor after favor. You notice he says, remember, Trump has shouted, screamed at Zelensky. He's demanded that Zelensky pay him for aid already provided. He's demanded that American companies, not even the American government, American companies get access to his minerals. He's sanctioned Ukraine, because remember, tariffs are just a sanction you do on someone you're not at war with. So tariffs, right? They sanctioned Ukraine to the tune of 10 or 15%, right? And Russia received no tariff, but Trump is standing up strong against Putin by tweeting at him. You have to get moving, Vladimir. Too many people are dying, thousands a week in a terrible and senseless war, a war that should never have happened and wouldn't have happened if I were president. You are president. It is happening. And that's your answer? Fucking tweet about it? Well, again, if you have Steve Witkoff leading your charge here, again, Steve Witkoff is the drunk uncle who has screamed at the TV at his favorite basketball team. If he's captaining the Lakers, they're going to lose. Anyway, before we talk about the other allies that we've shit all over, I wanted to mention, of course, that you see, I am in a new office. And you might be asking yourself, Paul, what are you doing in your new office, my guy? Well, the answer is, of course, that there is another kid on the way for me. And I got to move. Being a dad's hard. Being a dad means you're always busy. I'm making content, moving offices, just completed my first Ironman race, or half Ironman. And it's hard, guys. You're busy all the time. You're tired all the time. And I have a secret weapon. That secret weapon, Strike Gum. You guys know it's got all the caffeine of an energy drink in every single piece. This bad boy, literally, do you want to know how much I've been using it? I don't have an intact pack that I haven't opened, okay? That's because they're in my gym bag, they're in my glove box, right? They're all over the place, man. And if you're interested in joining the club of people who aren't going to let I'm too busy, right? Who don't believe in I'm too busy, or I'll get to it next year. If you want to join that club, or if you're in that club and you want to be even better, go to strikegum.com, pick some up. And I see you guys. You guys that order multiple, right? We can see the people who order every month. Guys, I know you. I get it. I love it too. But don't pay us extra money. I mean, fine, do it, but save your money. If you're going to order more than once, get the subscribe and save. The link is in the description. Go pick it up. Okay. Let's talk about Greenland, right? Now, this is a colonel with the Space Force, which, it's a branch of the Air Force. Now, you might recall that J.D. Vance visited a Space Force base in Greenland where these Guardians they're out there saying, hey, handling operations involving satellites, right? It's pretty important. The U.S. has satellites all over the globe, and it's important to keep, people on the ground who can monitor and observe those satellites. But more importantly, Greenland, a territory of Denmark, is an important partner. Now, this is the New York Post, which is a super right-wing outlet, but, let's see what they have to say. Essentially, the Space Force announced Thursday it removed Colonel Susanna Myers as leader of the Pituffik Space Base for, quote, loss of confidence in her ability to lead, right? Commanders are expected to adhere to the highest standards of conduct, especially as it relates to remaining nonpartisan in the performance of their duties, according to the statement. Myers, right, sent a message to her troops that in partly read that the views expressed during by Vice President J.D. Vance during his March 20th visit are, quote, not reflective of Pituffik Space Base. She said, quote, I spent the weekend thinking about Friday's visit, the actions taken, the words spoken, and how it must have affected each of you. This is, of course, in response to the vice president arriving at the base and saying, actually, our job is to conquer Greenland. And she said, quote, I do not presume to understand the current politics, but I do know is the concerns of the U.S. administration discussed by Vice President Vance on Friday are not reflective of Pituffik Space Base. I commit that for as long as I'm lucky enough to lead this base, all our flags will fly proudly together. This is referring to the fact that because this is an allied base, right, that is a NATO base, She said, listen, the American flag and the flag of Denmark and the flag of Greenland, they all fly together because we are all partners in this. Now, what's worth noting is this is actually this is probably something she expected to get fired for, right? Now, I guess there's two interpretations. It depends on exactly what she was referring to. And okay, you don't get to be a colonel and in charge of a base by not pissing people off, right? You don't rise to that level of officership without knowing how to navigate sensitive political situations. And sometimes that means shutting the fuck up, right? But the problem that she runs into is that you have an obligation as an officer in the military to not follow an order which is illegal, immoral, or unethical, right? So you can receive an order that is not the commission of a crime, but it may be immoral or unethical, right? For example, if you were told, hey, you are going to schedule, let's say you would be said, hey, on the schedule for guard duty, you're going to put all the worst shifts, you're going to give them to Black soldiers or Hispanic soldiers. You would say, well, assigning soldiers to duty is not illegal. And assigning soldiers to different duties is well within my scope of responsibilities. But you go, it's immoral and unethical to discriminate in that way, right? Even if it is allowed under the UCM, even if this were allowed under the UCMJ. And so what I suspect happened is that this person who worked closely daily with their allies in the government of Greenland and the government of Denmark had to sit there and listen to the vice president and say, we're going to conquer these people. We're going to take them over. Because remember, don't let the whitewashing fool you. When asked if military force was an option, Trump said, well, I'd prefer not to. But that's not the same thing as saying we're not going to conquer Greenland. I would prefer not to conquer Greenland. Yeah, no kidding. Putin would have preferred to not have to conquer eastern Ukraine, but he did, and he is. And so she likely said, listen, I've been in this role 20 plus years. I'm ready for retirement. This is my last assignment. Also, she may have already pissed someone off, because what's worth noting is that you're a colonel and you're given command of a remote base in Greenland, which is sometimes seen as punishment. Again, it depends on your perspective. But she may have said, listen, this is going to be my last assignment. I've pissed off too many people. And she may have said, listen, they're firing all kinds of female commanders. Maybe she's someone who's spoken out for women in the military. She's like, listen, I'm going to get canned no matter what I do. So what I'm going to do is go out as the officer that I feel I am, which is to say, speak out and not speak out against what she sees as immoral, unethical, or illegal orders, right? So she says, listen, as long as I'm leading this base, our allies are our allies. We do not conquer and threaten. We do not conquer our allies. We work with our partners, right? And, right, this is just absolutely what you would expect, right? Unfortunately, the like the rest of the article is basically spent just whitewashing and pretending, trying to create this fantasy that it makes sense to conquer an ally's territory for absolutely no reason, by the way. That's the other thing to take away from this. They say, oh, well, we need more missile defenses. We need more military installations. Well, during the Cold War, we had 45 plus installations in Greenland. So, and we haven't fundamentally reworked our relationship. So what exactly is the problem? Why can't we just open new stuff on our allies' territory, right? Why can't we just reopen some of those mothballed bases? Why do we have to conquer them? The answer appears to be that President Trump, and this is his initiative, seems to just look at Putin conquering Ukraine and say, why not me? Right? He gets to say, again, why can't I expand the United States? Why can't I grow territory? Why can't we become an empire in the 1800 sense of the word? Right? That's it. And everyone else is just sort of sitting here trying to whitewash this and pretend like this is something normal. Like every so often, presidents get it in their head to conquer their allies' territory, right? This is just a thing that happens. It's not. Don't let it become normal. Don't think that this is like the way things are done. Okay. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. I'm going to keep you posted as the clown show continues, right? We can all hear the music. Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, Daniel M., Ida Skycall, all of our lieutenant tier members, and of course, all you guys over on combatvetnews.com. Thank you, guys. Hit that subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully my lighting will be a little better. I know the lighting's a little weird. Cheers.